tying a few threads, I think all the speakers here agree that, the human is the center, the human is the core, and the human is the platform. So, we fit technology to the human and not vice versa, and we build a human that's adaptable. And another key point or thread throughout the speakers was the inextricable linkage of the physical to the other components, be it social, spiritual, etc. And here, I guess, it would be somewhat scandalous if we talked about human performance without an SLA Marshall quote, so I'll throw one out there, which is, tired men take fright more easily and frightened men swiftly tire. So the physical is linked to fatigue, to stress, to fear, to uncertainty. And so we really do have to think holistically about the implications. Finally, I think all the speakers addressed the challenges, and here I think we'll probably get into this a little bit in the question and answer period of discussion, and hit at the great introduction that General Palmer gave us earlier about the challenges inherent in thinking about enhancing physical performance. Because we are working against human nature to some extent. So General Palmer, to echo and endorse his comments, a soldier is a pack rat, specifically the inexperienced soldier. So if you take something out of his ruck, he's going to put something back in because he just might need it later. And what are the long-term impacts then of this sort of technology or these sorts of enhancements? Something that Karen brought up and I think is also echoed throughout physically but also ethically. Does it make the soldier weaker? Can I sustain that equipment if it is a technological solution forward, specifically in a austere environment, which we do still operate in quite frequently?
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for that presentation, ladies and gentlemen. I want to preface this just to tell you a little bit about my background. One, some of you might say, I look at this guy, I'm Major Donald Bigham. I'm probably out of uniform because I'm up here with an all-Army shirt. Two-time world champion, current squat record, world record holder, in 2016 Army Athlete of the Year. So they've kind of empowered me to, when I go out, to kind of help promote that by, obviously wearing this uniform that's a little bit outside. 23-year veteran, all infantry, just got done serving as a U.S. Army strength coach at the physical fitness school, did that for 2 years, rewrote the Master Fitness POI there, and I'm currently the Human Performance strength coach director at Fort Benning right now. So with all that being said, one thing I want to preface my question, at least at this topic or aspect, is in reference to the Thor 3 model. I'm very familiar with that, Colonel Thomas. I've worked with 7th Group and John and Riley pretty closely down there. I've done a lot with 75th. And it's a great program, and I'm really impressed with all of the accolades that you're completing with that. My perspective is on the conventional soldier. We're talking about 93 to 95% of the rest of the Army. If I would have walked on an installation in 1950 and looked at physical training, and then I walk on the installation in 2017, there's very little change. We're still doing body weight calisthenics for the most part. And you say from a biomechanics standpoint, what is the big issue? We're talking about exoskeleton and other aspects to bring into this. Well, one thing that I did over a year worth of studies, I tested over 300 soldiers that were all at 300 or higher on the Army APFT. And as we know, that was developed in 1980. That only captures 3 of the 17 physical dominant components. It's a sagittal plane, it's an oxidative, and it's muscle endurance. We're missing the other 14 attributes that's not being captured. If you look at 1918 with the first physical fitness test, it covered 11 of 17. It had a 100-meter run, it had an 8-foot wall climb, it had a hand grenade toss. I can continue to go with those aspects. So it was all holistic. In reference to that, what I'm getting back to my driving point is the conventional Army is driven off of the Army APFT. That is their assessing piece that we derive from. There is no SMEs or no physical dominance or strength coaches inside the conventional Army. I am the only one that I'm aware of that serves in the Army that has a master's degree in kinesiology and has commanded multiple companies in an infantry formation that I'm aware of. Everybody else is civilian contractors. My question is, when are we going to take and lean forward in the foxhole? and actually do something for the conventional soldier. We keep talking about the soldier's number one, but we keep allowing all our funding to go to everything minus the soldier when it comes to physical dominance. Why are we not using undulating fitness programs instead of linear? Why are we not using triphasic that covers eccentric, concentric, and isometric? Why are we not using a velocity-based programming? There's a lot of questions here because, again, that's one of the things I'm doing from a human performance standpoint is I'm trying to make it a strength-based. And you say, why strength-based? Because when you go back and look at the musculoskeletal injuries, $3.8 billion in the last year that we spent in the United States on that, of that money, it could have been significantly reduced if we could have just done a strength assessment. Of those 300 soldiers that I assessed, 65% could not do 1.5 times their body weight on a squat. 65% could not do 2 times their body weight on a deadlift. And the science says if you can complete those, you can now handle 30% of your load or more without exoskeleton, without additional stress. But instead, we have really relied on body weight calisthenic 1950 physical fitness programs for essentially 93%. I'm curious what the panel, has to say about, the vision we're going to be able to make a change, because we're 30 years behind the benchmark here. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Phillip,
I appreciate it. Bottom line is I can't agree more. So very well said. And that's why the caveat was on that front slide of mine. Say, hey, there's nothing about our program that's special because right away whenever I brief this to the Army, it's automatic. Oh, you guys are special. You have all that money. I didn't add that 2 of those programs, the cognitive enhancement and interpersonal enhancement, are not part of POTF. Those aren't programs of record. Those aren't resourced. Those are every year baling wire and duct tape, trying to find one of the generals to give us a little bit of money to keep it going. So all that being said, I couldn't agree more. I think things like the Thor program could absolutely be scaled at the centers of excellence. At your drill sergeant academies where you're teaching your drill sergeants, you could do HDP type programs there. We're not going to make all of them strength and conditioning coaches, nor are we going to make them sports psychologists or any of these other things. But we can make it where it's like they slept in a Holiday Inn. Like they're not a sports psychologist, but they kind of understand at least what has been coached, and so they can at least identify barriers to performance and get the folks in the right place. I don't know what the right answer is on this, but I absolutely agree with the Major. I think we've got to start at those lowest level echelons. Your PME, we've got NCO academies that you can get some of this stuff in at, warrant officer academies, drill sergeant academies, and the COEs. And that way you don't have to scale it down to every single company or anything like that, but it's absolutely doable, in my opinion.
Having discussed this at the 3- and 4-star level, both in various branches of the U.S. military, the answer is you're going to have to change the way the system is designed because the 3 and 4 stars get it. They understand this. They see opportunities, but the system is designed in such a way that even if they fight for it, it's hard to win that fight. So because we have a big system and it's designed along the model, I think Lieutenant Colonel Thomas nicely discussed, how things go from requirements and then you end up needing a program executive office and a program manager. Until we have one of those for human performance, it's not clear to me that we will make that much progress except onesie-twosie. So my hope is that these events like this and discussions at the senior leadership level do open those doors, but we're leaving low-hanging fruit on the table, I agree, and I think we can do a lot better. And the usual discussion is, oh, do it in soft first, and it'll peter down, and that may indeed happen, but I think it's time to do it faster for more because enhancing 95 to 98% of the force is going to give you a lot of bang for your buck.
I really don't have much more to add than what these two just said, and I totally agree as well. Being an athlete, I know how important it is to develop physical fitness and strength to be able to sustain a high level of performance. So I can't agree more, and I think that's the direction that we need to go in.
afraid my question is going to be very similar follow-up. The panel did outstanding in kind of complying with the request. Phil, you talked about enhancement, and Karen, augmentation, and Andrew, the intervention, and you've identified kind of in that order again some of the structural issues, some of the testing and making stuff R&D folks do work for practitioners, and then the kind of the realm of the possible for you, Andrew. But my question gets to the barriers to enhancement and why we're not transforming at a rate that you would expect, knowing that many of these things are already in use in the general population. I know, Phil, you talked about the no advocate, which means no real change in culture because it's looked at as a special thing with special ops, and there's no PEO that looks for money. Karen, you talked about the operational performance maturing to do the appropriate testing so what we do buy works. And Andrew, you talk about not having, you didn't use these words, but kind of a culture of aggressive ethical enhancement as opposed to just, kind of doing better to not break people or to prevent bad things from happening, but actually aggressively going after. Is there anything else that you could offer to policymakers or the practitioners that are going to build structure to manage this process? Anything else that we could think of to help us take advantage of what could be a revolution?
It's a great question. I don't know. No, yeah, I'm not really sure how we're going to overcome it. I mean, there's so many programs within the U.S. Army that have their little advocates, and if you've ever been around our Army, you see that we're pretty bad about rice bowls, cylinders of excellence, and all these things. And it's really hard to tear those things down, especially whenever you have, and this is nothing against contracted civilians or GS civilians or Army officers, NCOs, or anything, but whenever you start getting these programs that are infused with contractors, GS civilians, and everybody that are protecting these programs, it's really hard to get them to realize, hey, we're on the same team. You're doing, I'll use resilience as an issue. I'm concerned about resilience too, but can we roll it up under one umbrella and do these things? The other point of that is it's very easy if you have a program that is easily measured. And a lot of the human dynamics and performance stuff, particularly when you start getting over onto cognitive abilities, some of those things are a lot harder to measure. And some of these other programs have the benefit of measurement. And so if we can figure out, if we can crack the code on measurement and getting it all the way down to the operational level, kind of like what Andrew was talking about before, the cost savings for some of these programs would be enormous. But right now, we don't have the metrics and enough horsepower to get it done, at least where I'm sitting right now. And then there's just a cultural change that we talked about. If you even look at the Army's concept of the big 6 plus 1, just think about that for a second. The big 6 plus 1. So it's these big 6 platforms, vertical lift, all these things, plus 1. What's the plus 1? It's the soldier and SWAT. Why isn't it the big 1 plus 6? So it's, if you just look at our terminology, so I could go on and on about that without answering your question, because I still didn't answer your question. The bottom line is there's a lot of cultural changes that have to do it. I think getting after the measurement piece is going to be critical to be able to display what the cost savings actually are.
I think just elaborating on that for the wearables, there are no requirements documents right now for wearable human augmentation devices. I was just talking to Pete about that last night, and until then, you're not going to see a lot of money dedicated towards those type of technologies until their requirements are written. And one of the interesting thing too is to bring back the operational relevance. So we have these devices. How do we assess the operational performance? Are they worth it for the cost that they can do? And can we actually enhance performance based on the major's comments below with using physical fitness as opposed to these wearable devices? So I think all of these sort of trade-offs and understandings have to be sort of understood and looked at before we can move forward.
Who in the audience thinks it would be appropriate to use an intervention in your soldiers that you know would decrease the likelihood they died, but you know would probably hurt their knees and backs. Who thinks that would be okay? I don't see a lot of hands. Who thinks that would be inappropriate? I see a lot of hands. I just described body armor. So if I just described body armor, and many of you said that's ethically inappropriate, this leads us to a problem. The discussion of ethics around this topic is facile. When people say that, well, but we don't want to have an advantage, it's not fair, I don't ever want our men and women to be in a fair fight. Look, certainly in the US, we had serious ethical lapses in the 50s, 60s, and 70s in testing, and we should never return to that. We should always have informed consent be the first line and the first wicket before we go ahead with any testing. But the long story short is people want it, and most of what senior leaders are scared of when they call ethics is really PR. And I was briefing on Capitol Hill or congressional staffers 2 weeks ago, and they're not that worried about it. So I want to tell our senior leaders, it's okay. They're not going to take your rice bowl away. I think there's a big problem here is that we need to get away from the facile thinking that is focused on, oh my gosh, we can't have any possible negative consequences. One of the speakers this morning said we want to make sure that there's no unintended consequences. How about the unintended consequences of sitting in a helicopter that's vibrating at high frequency that destroys your ears and causes nerve problems? How about the unintended consequences of sitting in a tank for long periods of time? So even any of the big 6 platforms that we use have unintended consequences that are negative to the human, and we are okay because it's a risk-adjusted analysis. We just need to apply the exact same risk-adjusted analysis to the human performance tools, and guess what? They're going to come out ahead. Because not only are the negative downsides often quite small, but the benefits often tremendously counterweigh them, and not just to performance, but to long-term health and other things. So I think if we can have a much more informed discussion at the senior leader level, then you won't get things like an email from a senior leader in the US military who said, you know, I tried, I thought it made sense, but at the end of the day, we're designed to buy things and not help our people. So I think we can do it, and I think smaller forces like SOF have had an advantage, and maybe smaller forces like the Canadian forces have an advantage because the bureaucracy is not as severe. I do hope that in the US, we can get after it as well, though.
Just the last couple of comments just was a flash of my whole life, right? Riding in helicopters, wearing body armor, and paying the price for it now. And then I'm just going to fast forward to, I'm like a year out from retiring. I've never been smarter in my life, but I'm a year out from retiring. So now it's time to go work for a contractor. When I look at my boss, who's a little older than I am, but one of the, look, he's going to rate me, I'm retiring, so it doesn't matter. So sycophant does not apply here. You know, one of the smartest guys I've met. He would be the ultimate platoon leader. Not because he would be, I want him to be a platoon leader, but because he's smart, he's discerning. He's able to think about decisions. So let me just back up for a second, and I want to answer one question, which is, why don't we do soldier enhancement? Because there's no money in it. I ran the requirements process for the United States Army for a while. And what did we talk about? Helicopter replacements, the tank after next, trucks in Europe, because those are billion-dollar platforms. This isn't a billion-dollar thing. That's not the way we look at it. We spend our time, because the POM, our budget cycle, drives us to make these big decisions early, it consumes our senior leaders' time. It gets back to a lot of the mission command piece, right? Where do we need to make these decisions at the ground level? It's criminal that we have to fight for budgets when you don't have a program of record to do what is obviously taking care of soldiers in the right way. But we have to withhold all those decisions to a program executive office. That doesn't make any sense when you've got people here that are actually working it. So there's almost a fundamental relook at how we have to really think about, back to the age-old problem of bureaucracy and procurement. Because there's nothing more important than really the platform that carries these pieces of equipment, forward. So the last point that I would make is that I heard somebody talk, we talked a little bit about Veterans Administration earlier. When business realizes that we're more than a broken, homeless individual, and that we're actually enabling profit to a company, that's when the business side is really going to start. I mean, they already do. They already gravitate toward military in many ways, but in many ways not. But when we can show that we have value beyond just the military, then you're going to see, I think, something, a deliberate effort to try to really get after bringing veterans into the workplace. But anyway, so I would just say that it's not big enough for people to really care about, although it's the Army centerpiece platform. It's just a comment, but for your thoughts.
I think that's exactly right, sir. That's part of the problem we have just trying to palm with P11 Special Ops money. It's too small. The Council of Colonels know the generals support it, and so they won't palm it, knowing that the generals will pay out of their pocket to keep it going. And then trying to take it into P2 palm, then it's getting the Army to buy off on the fact that it can be leveraged, back to that first slide. And then again, if it's trying to do it as a proof of concept, it's a pretty small palm. Once again, it's not big enough for them to look at. So those are challenges that we're facing. We're trying to come up with some concepts to be able to leverage what we're doing down with the new special or Security Force Assistance Brigades down at Benning and the Military Advisor Training Academy, trying to be able to partner with that, so maybe they'll palm it. We'll see.
But let me make that comment I said jokingly serious. Let's say you spent $1 billion on human performance enhancement interventions, not just R&D. So let's say, WAG, 1 million active duty, gets $1,000 a person. Do you know what we could do with that kind of money? We could probably take the number of people who could make it into soft units and increase it by 10 or 20%, which would fill his recruiting requirements. We could change the training cycle so you could probably do 10 to 20% more training. On the soft side, when they fly to train maybe once a month, if you don't treat jet lag properly, that's 4 to 5 days out of 30 that you're not training at your optimal. So now suddenly your training's degraded by 15 to 20%. We send corporate executives to Europe and Asia with no jet lag. Why should our operators be flying without those same tools? So the answer is, for $1,000 a person, $1 billion across the force, which is not even close to 1% of the entire budget, you could do an incredible amount. And so it's really up to the senior leaders, who are the people who have the levers, along with Congress, to make a decision that they actually believe in this stuff.
I would be a bit more cautious about the performance enhancements. We have 2 historical examples. One of them is Germany, Second World War, methamphetamine administration, which was very successful in a very brief encounter in the Bulge. The consequences of taking the methamphetamine are profound, and for decades later in the soldiers affected. Second example is in our United States, taking testosterone, men 40 years and older. No apparent ill effects initially. After 5 years to 10 years, what we see is a massive increase in prostate cancer, number one. We see an inability to withdraw from the testosterone, psychiatric problems, personal problems, and behavioral problems. So the notion that we're going to administer with some assurance that biological response modifiers, which is what I'm working on, with no ill effects, I think is inappropriate at this point. And we can document probably many other examples of the same thing.
Sure, I think that's to my last slide, which talks about why we need to do research well. And like any other intervention or any other thing that, when the FDA approves a drug, they don't just say, go ahead and use it. They watch what happens. And if over time the performance benefits decrease, you don't want to spend money on it. And if over time you see more negative effects increase, we have to be paying attention for these things. But there are a number of tools on the board that are ready to go that are, I think, we have better sense that they're safe than the rest of the things we're buying for the military, and we know they can enhance performance. So while I absolutely agree that some of the very blunt tools that have been used in the past, amphetamines, testosterone, have in some cases not worked well, and in other cases had quite serious negative effects, There are areas that are ready to go now, and there are areas that are ready to be studied and make sure that they have the benefits and don't have the cost. So while I agree that we have to be careful not to just throw the flag and say this whole field can't work because we've had negative examples, that would be like saying we had plane crashes so we shouldn't use planes. What we need to do instead is do the safety right, do the testing right, and then just like we have now very safe and very effective airplanes, we can have safe and effective enhancements.
Nothing more to add other than I do believe that the long-term consequences for all of these types of human augmentation technologies or any type of supplements should be taken into consideration and understood. Because what may benefit some performance in the short term, like they said, can cause issues in the long term, and I think that needs to be quantified.